Well, good evening. I want to thank you all for joining us at the American Psychiatric Association Foundation Town Hall for Mentally Health Safe Schools in Times of Pandemic. At the I am the APA Foundation Chair of the Board and also the APA CEO and Medical Director. So it is my pleasure to welcome you here to this town hall. A very important topic that everyone is discussing at all levels of government, in organizations, and in families, and of course their homes, as well as in all the schools that are really looking at this very seriously. An estimated 56.4 million students across K-2 education are heading back to the classrooms, whether they are virtual or in person. This does not account for the staff members that make those school communities possible, or the parents, the families, and the guardians that are also facing uncertainty. I, as a former health director, truly understand what everyone in this country is now facing when thinking about should they send their children and kids, adolescents, and also the young adults to universities back to get their learning in person. We're seeing an increase in depression and anxiety across all age levels. We want to be sure to provide school communities, from the students to the parents and the staff, with guidance on what should be considered around mental health when going back to school during a pandemic. We want to provide each of you listening with some tips on how to take care of yourselves and others' mental health and well-being, along with the ways that you can, 1, notice early warning signs in youth, 2, some tips on talking to someone who you're concerned about, and 3, what are the actions to take if you think that someone is showing the very early warning signs of mental health or other distress. As the APA Foundation Chair of the Board and the CEO Medical Director, it's my pleasure to welcome you. I would like to particularly thank the APA and Foundation staff for their hard work putting this important and very timely event. Chris, thank you, as being the leader of all of us on this. My gratitude also is extended to our APA member expert panelists, great leaders, and also great psychiatrists and child psychiatrists. Dr. Shapiro, Dr. Krause, Dr. Dubé, and I'll say Dr. Shapiro and Dr. Krause actually sit on the APA Foundation board, as well as being very involved with the APA and also the AMA with Dr. Krause. Dr. Dubé, Dr. Colon Rivera, and Dr. Harding, who will be introduced shortly. I will now turn it over to our moderator for this town hall, Christopher Seeley, the Program Director of School and Justice Initiatives for the APA Foundation, who has truly taken his program to another level of greatness in terms of schools wanting to really see how they can identify kids by listening, learning, and acting from the experts that you are today as you talk about it. Chris.
Hello, and thank you, Dr. Levin, for the introduction. And thank you so much for joining us tonight for this virtual town hall, Mentally Healthy Schools in Times of a Pandemic. We know that across the country that going back to school is on the minds of every community, and we want to be sure to keep in mind the mental health of everyone who is in that school community. Our expert panelists want to be sure to provide you with an opportunity to ask them questions about being mentally healthy at school during a pandemic. To ask our panel a question, please utilize the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question for a particular panelist, please indicate that within your question. We may not be able to get to your specific question, but we will be working to develop a follow-up FAQ document based on the questions we may receive here tonight. We are recording this event, so if you happen to lose your connection, do not worry. This information will be archived on the APA Foundation website. Before I begin to introduce the panelists, we want to get to a sense of who is with us tonight. We invite you to take this poll on how your school is dealing with going back to school, whether it's virtual, in person, or blended. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you our expert panelist. First, Dr. Gabrielle Shapiro. Dr. Shapiro is a professor of psychiatry at Mount Sinai Health Systems. She's a certified child and adolescent psychiatrist and a distinguished fellow of both the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists, ACAP, and the APA. She is currently chair of the APA Council on Children, Adolescents, and Their Families, and is on the APA Foundation Board of Directors. Dr. Shapiro's clinical focus is public psychiatry and integrated care of Latinx populations and other minority groups. She mentors and supervises medical students and residents and fellows. Thank you, Dr. Shapiro, for joining us. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Louis Kraus. Dr. Kraus is the Women's Board Professor, Chief of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at Rush University Medical Center. He is also the Treasurer on the APA Foundation Board of Directors and Delegate to the American Medical Association for ACAT. Dr. Kraus consults with numerous school districts with a focus on children with special needs. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Kraus. Dr. Anish Dubey. Dr. Dubey is a psychiatrist on staff for the County of Orange in California, treating young people involved in the justice and foster care systems and clinical supervision for child and adolescent psychiatry fellows from the University of California, Irvine. He's also a member of the American Psychiatric Association Council on Child, Adolescents, and Their Families, and an advisor for the American Psychiatric Association Foundation. Thank you so much, Dr. Dubey, for joining us. Dr. Hector Colon Rivera. Dr. Colon Rivera is a distinguished adolescent, adult, and addiction-boarded psychiatrist of the Pennsylvania medical community. He's the medical director of the Asociación Puertorriqueños en Marcha Incorporated Behavioral Health Program, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the quality of life of Hispanic communities through direct behavior and substance use disorder services in the Philadelphia area. Dr. Colon Rivera is also an advisor of the APA Foundation and actually served on its school redevelopment work group. Thank you, Dr. Colon Rivera, for joining us. And finally, Dr. Lisa Harding. Dr. Harding is a clinical instructor of psychiatry at the Yale School of Medicine and the medical director of Depression MD. She's currently an APA Foundation advisor, trained to deliver the Notice Talk Act at School program. She's also a former APA Foundation Diversity Leadership Fellow, and Dr. Hardy's current focus is to integrate her work as a psychiatrist around mental health and well-being within African American faith communities. Thank you, Dr. Hardy, for joining us. We want to start out this conversation by talking about what going back safely to school should include. The APA and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists put out a statement with 8 points of precautions in reopening schools. In number 1, it states one size does not fit all. Dr. Shapiro, I'd like to invite you to the table, and I'd like for you to expand on what this means as it relates to students, staffs, and family.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be able to address this question. So really, one size doesn't fit all applies to both families and also communities. So if we look first at communities, we really have to look at what the public health agency in the community is recommending. And we really need to think about that and base our decision on returning to the classroom on scientific evidence and what's going on in your community. I think we have to leave politics out of it completely, and we really have to think carefully and thoughtfully about this decision. And we have to think of the best interest of the students, faculty in the schools, and parents. So for instance, in a family, if you have a family that's blended with multi-generational members, you really have to be concerned about the older members getting COVID, and you have to consider that in your decision making. You also have to consider what's best for families in terms of are the parents working, how old the children are these children that do well learning virtually. Some kids do very well, and some kids have difficulty. So it's really an individual decision that we have to weigh up, thinking of the individual family circumstances and community circumstances.
Thank you, Dr. Shapiro. Social interaction is so crucial to the proper development of students. Given this, I'm wondering, Dr. Dubey, I'm wondering if you could jump in, and what should schools be considering when it comes to optimizing social interaction alongside educational objectives?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all for being here. I want to first make the point that the educational objectives and social interaction, they're not mutually exclusive. Oftentimes they go hand in hand. And especially in the United States, when you look at educational data, the further along you go, so about around high school, peer influence becomes a huge deal, more so than other countries. And so there's a high emphasis on peer influence in this country, starting from kindergarten, but you see it get even more significant as they get to high school. What's the importance of peer influence? You have social interaction, you learn from your peers, the importance of peer development, but also what we expect of our young people as they get older and their future success. A lot of it has to do with peer interactions. So when you're thinking of the job, the work marketplace in the future, some of the things that we would expect of our young people to learn as part of the group process is long-term strategic planning. You learn self-regulation from your peers, oftentimes by watching others and how they interact. And there's also the ability to think flexibly and creatively when you're working with others. Those are things that we expect as part of the group process. And that's a lot of the stuff that happens in schools. And I don't want to make it sound like all group interactions are positive. One of the interesting things that they noticed, at least in the beginning stages of the pandemic, was that there were fewer young folks going to the emergency rooms for mental health crises. That could be for a number of different reasons, but at least some folks hypothesized that there was less bullying. And that was one of the reasons why this was happening. So it's not always a positive thing. And because of the high emphasis on peer relations, one of the other things that you look at is that, social status, peer group influence in other respects, those like gossip, attention from peers, those can be distracting as well. So it's not always a positive thing that you have the group experiences. But what you can take away, and what I think, to answer part of your second question about what can schools do to increase positive, I think this, if anything, this provides us an opportunity to increase the positive experiences of group cohesion. So what you can do, for example, is empower students through asking them, each community is different. And I think part of not just asking administrators, parents, and teachers, but also the young people themselves, what's going to work? How are you going to be best educated? That's going to be really important, because oftentimes we don't take their perspectives into consideration, but I think they're going to be an important part of this, and they might come up with some of the best ideas. So to be able to empower them and to see what's going to work with them. A couple of different schools are working, for example, in what they're calling quarantine pods. So you might have different groups of young people who work together on educational tasks, on keeping themselves connected. You can have them go through the same kinds of classes. And I know in elementary schools and middle schools, you usually have the same classes, but you can have them be sort of responsible for each other and learning from each other. So just like you do in the actual physical classrooms, if there is virtual learning, that doesn't necessarily need to stop. So that the fears that we have are that if you aren't engaging socially, it could lead to increased isolation. The CDC data is already pointing, it was just released this past week, that there's higher rates of anxiety and depression amongst young people. And so I am pretty sure, with everybody involved, we can come up with some creative solutions to have not just educational attainment, but also to increase the social interactions and have them mutually help each other.
Is there, are there questions that you think are appropriate to ask your students or, your child around how they're feeling, or a way for them to, I guess, express what is going on, either in a one-on-one setting or more of a group virtual classroom setting? Are there some recommendations for questions that people could ask?
I think for parents, this is an opportunity to be more involved, because especially if young folks are staying home, is to be checking in more. For teachers, it's the same kind of thing, to being able to ask maybe a group. Maybe you can't ask everybody individually, but asking how's the group doing, and having the group check in with each other. One of the problems with, this current group, they are socially interactive, this young generation, but one of the problems with social interaction, if it's exclusively on social media, is that it tends to be biased. What's being represented in social media tends to be biased in a very skewed direction. And so it's not necessarily representative of what young folks are experiencing. So this is where you ask, how are you really doing? How's everything going? Are you still talking to your friends? How are you feeling? Very basic kinds of health questions that you should be asking.
And I do think that there's something to be said about the shared experience of being able to have that conversation in a group setting, so that a student who is also going through a similar experience of feeling uncertain or nervousness or anxiousness. I think that's also something we all feel during this time, and I think even giving opportunities for staff to have that interaction and engagement to, I think, share the experience of uncertainty and sometimes anxiety is sometimes a good thing. Is that right?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's okay. Again, going back to learning theory, it's okay to be challenged a little bit. And so I think this can be an opportunity. We don't want our students to be overwhelmed, but at the same time, one of the things that's come out in the American educational system, when you look at the research, is that students are consistently underwhelmed. They find school boring. And so this is an opportunity, again, to challenge them, but in creative ways.
Thank you, Dr. Dubé. Um, Students with additional needs and supports also need to be considered during this time. Dr. Kraus, I'm wondering if you can join the conversation, as this group of children require the school to really adapt the learning in the classroom. And now that we're virtual, blended a bunch of different ways, how should schools really attempt to do this now?
Yeah, it's not an easy question to answer. There are 13 different special education criteria. The ones that probably are most relevant to what we're talking about have to do with kids with emotional disabilities, kids with autism, kids with significant health impairments. It could, as a result of their health impairment, result in them not being able to return back to school. One of the, on the one hand, it's really a two-handed thought. On the one hand, it's certainly safer for kids to be able to remain at home and do e-learning in regards to getting COVID, spreading COVID, what have you. But on the other hand, they're losing out. Kids with special needs lose out that much quicker and have difficulty holding on to the learned material. Kids with emotional difficulties need the additional social work services and group services, social interactions that school have to offer. What we're finding in the community are these kids that aren't getting back to school are at higher risk for more acute mental health issues, hospitalizations, et cetera. They're really struggling. And we're talking about mainstream schools, but remember, we also have therapeutic day schools. Many of these kids in mainstream schools are in self-contained classes. And then we also have residential schools. Many of the parents with children know exactly what I'm talking about in regards to these kids not being able to get back to the specific programming that they so badly need. Now, one of the bigger issues that have come up, as simple as it sounds, is that many of these kids, because of sensory issues, have struggled wearing their masks. Children with autism, for example, sometimes very young children, and teachers' family tend to be holding their hands up saying, this is it, they can't wear masks, so we got to figure out some other way to work around them. But that's really not the case. There's no reason why you can't work with the sensory issues. We have occupational therapists at school. Family members can work with this issue. They can find what kids can wear and how long they can tolerate masks for. This is really crucially important. And I think that taking all of this in is an incredibly important balance. Now, for most of these kids, starting to get them back to school is going to be crucially important in regards to their mental health, and balancing the risk of worsening mental health conditions versus getting COVID have to be taken into account. So we're going to look at communities that have higher infection rates right now. Well, they're going to be less likely to go back to school right now. One of the problems that families are having is that schools are starting to call them up saying, we've got to revisit their individual education plans, their IEPs. We've got to redevelop them because we can't offer all the services. Well, that's garbage, all right? Schools have a federal responsibility to meet the IEP goals and all that is implemented in the IEP. And what's really important there is that families should not in any way, take that sitting down. They need to really stand up to what their child needs and hold the schools accountable for their children's IEPs.
And Dr. Cross, we actually got a question from the attendees, and I wanted to bring it to you first. Schools that are providing virtual learning this fall are largely providing self-paced learning rather than interactive learning, like teachers teaching through Zoom or real-time response apps on tablets. What is your thoughts about not providing interactive learning?
Well, I think that most people would have the same thoughts as I, is that, yeah, I think that for many kids, interactive learning is very important. Now, the reality is that some kids, have IEPs where they struggle with interactive learning, and they have other types of online learning. This is a small group of kids. For the majority of kids, in my view, interactive learning is extremely important. The more you can socialize, whether it's going to be online or in person, in my view, the better it is for the child.
Dr. Shapiro, you wanna jump in?
Hi. Yeah, I think that one of the reasons this is happening is because a lack of staff and staffing. And so I think that, perhaps they'll begin that way, but I do think that most of the school districts are trying to do a blend of self-paced and interactive. And, I wonder if the reason this school district is having this is because of a lack of staff. So I'm not sure. I also think that we can improve the situation by facilitating groups with same age peers. So at least they can have study groups or homework groups. And I think the schools can facilitate that in the parent associations. So.
Thank you, Dr. Shapiro. So we do want to understand a little bit more about the resources that your school currently has available. So we're going to launch a poll while we talk through some other information around just what school resources you have available, whether that's a school counselor, a school social worker, and really around the mental health resources. Really because this pandemic has impacted us all. And when you think of the school community, you may start with the students, but it also includes the staff of the school and the parents and the guardians at home. And we work directly with schools here at the APA Foundation. And when this pandemic started, we were right there in the trenches with them, trying to figure out how best to support them and their students. And I think one thing that came to mind was the school staff itself. And I think across the country, they're also dealing with the stress of going back to work. Dr. Harding, thinking of the conversation you have had with your children's school, what are some of the things schools should be considering when it comes to the mental health and the well-being of their staff?
Thanks for the question, Chris. First of all, to all the teachers and school support staff that are out there, and thinking of schools opening, you are now joining everybody else that's working on the front line. So I think that I have to acknowledge that. So thank you for that. Chris, can I share the slides or can I just?
Just go ahead and walk through them.
Okay,
Yep.
sure. Okay. So I think the first thing we want to understand is, how do we cope? We're looking for basically four things. For teachers, we're looking for peer support and connection. Peer support and connection to others in your district. Whether it is you are physically going into the school building and delivering part virtual learning, or you are staying home and delivering that learning. Think about ways within the administration of your school to stay connected to each other. Exercise. I believe exercise is one of the greatest things that can help with stress. Definitely, I think that social distance walking, even teachers having that Zoom break built in for themselves. Understanding what supports are given to you. For example, the principal here at our school, in our school for my 7-year-old, has told us and said, hey, how do we give the teachers a break? How are parents now involved in this part of this virtual learning? When we think of the construct of education, it's shifted now. Teachers are taking on a different responsibility. We think about shifting roles, and so are we as parents. It's very difficult to think of, I think I consider myself a really smart person, but sometimes I struggle, like, how do I teach somebody middle school math? And I think the biggest thing that I have learned in all of this is communication. And figure out within your school, how do you get that communication across? What are the channels and how to reach out? Looking at your personal wellness, how do you cope? Understanding recognizing what symptoms of stress are. Psychic stress can translate itself into physical symptoms. So understanding what tiredness in you feels like. I encourage most teachers to keep a log. You are going to be doing this, it's in for the long haul. If you get a strategy and sort of pace yourself and keep a daily log of the symptoms and reach out to your physician, reach out to your own school and let them know what's happening. That two-way communication is one of the most important things that's going to keep you healthy. Understanding the limitations of children and just being open to different models. We all learned our trade one way and we are all learning to adapt. So I think having a bit of open-mindedness really, really helps. Knowing when to ask for help and knowing where to ask for help. So within your administration, in going back and having these conversations, that's a great place to start. Recognize you yourself when you need breaks. Group check-ins, I think somebody mentioned as well, the Zoom check-in and the social pods. I think those would be great for teachers as well.
Thank you. And, Dr. Harding, I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on the dual roles. I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, but, this dual role that some teachers might be playing right now with balancing online schooling with at-home demands, such as educating their own children, worried about their own students who, might not be getting attention at home due to lack of supervision, nutrition, and other factors. I think speaking to that a little bit, could you touch on that?
Yes. In medicine, we talk about the collaborative care model. So the collaborative care model is basically where you have all of your physicians communicating through a central point, who is generally your primary care doctor, and they involve the specialist. I think our education during this time is moving towards this collaborative education model, where teachers are now should solicit help from the parents, should solicit help from their administrator. I am actually one of those parents that will be shifted now to part-time home and part-time work because I fortunately can to help the teachers who are now transitioning to this. Chris, some teachers never used virtual learning platforms before. And so it's an adaptation. So they are supporting their children as well as ours. And flexible learning models. I think that is what I have seen most of the school districts here in Connecticut moving towards, and I think it can work.
Awesome. We actually have a couple of questions here from attendees, and I just wanted to bring them up to the group. Dr. Harney, if you want to take the first one here, this is actually a fellow mental health professional, it sounds like. I am a therapist for children and adolescents, and I found during the quarantine, the school had the possibility to identify how the students were performing. So this school period, each school will know how many students will be able to be ready to continue interactive learning using a computer. But parents are stuck. They are not teachers and they have to stop working to stay at home with their children, which is a big problem in the family economy. So just, I think, maybe speak towards the actual impact that family members may be losing their jobs or having to make that decision, I think, to go part-time to kind of support the student teaching, the impact that has on the family economy.
Definitely. Thank you for the question. I think in all of this, a lot of people have asked, well, what is different? Well, everything is different. Unemployment rates are going up. We have seen increased unsupervised time with children where then substance abuse can become a problem. Even substance abuse within the home. I've had parents tell me they've had to make sure that they have locked their own liquor cabinet. So there's a lot that is happening. With regard to shifting the role and balancing, scheduling and a timetable. work in the breaks. The model will not work for everyone. I think Dr. Shapiro right off the bat spoke about this is not a one model fit all. For those parents that are unemployed and still need the help, reach out and ask. I think as a therapist within the school, you know, having access to that data is paramount to answering these questions. You're then able to check in and identify those children and families that need help.
Thank you. We have one around children and kind of normalcy here. You know, many parents are sending their children back to school to bring back some normalcy. I'm afraid once they are back, the students will feel more isolated once they realize they will be in one desk all day long, including breakfast and lunch, with teachers and students in mask and social distancing. There will be no normal things happening. What can I do as a teacher to help students through this time? Thanks, Dr. Shapiro.
Yes, hi. So I think that it depends on the age group that you're working with. Obviously, adolescents have the ability to abstract and understand that the reason that we're sitting at a desk and not doing anything away from the desk and not interacting is because we want to prevent infection. However, the younger children, you know, it's going to be more difficult to make them understand. And, you know, I think that doing fun games in school, like you could do charades, and keep social separation and social distancing. You could, you know, play psychodrama games and explain why we're doing it. And so normalizing it and making it fun, maybe shadow touching, like 6 feet away, you know, with children. There's lots of things they can do as teachers to normalize it. And I think it's also the kids will pick up on what the teachers and parents are feeling about the whole situation. So parents are very scared and teachers are scared as well, but they're also feeling sad that we have a new normal. And I think that we have to try to make it fun. This is the reality of what our society and the world is going through now.
Thank you, Dr. Shapiro. I'm wondering if you could actually stay on and talk about what considerations need to be made when we think about taking care of the students' mental health and well-being. Just if there's some tips or things that you could offer to really maintain children's mental health.
So I think I want to start out by saying that our whole society and the world really has been through a great trauma during the last 6 months. And it's not over yet. So I think this is a perfect time to erase the stigma of mental illness for the children and students, as well as the parents and for society. People are realizing that they're getting depressed. I mean, Michelle Obama, you know, really helped last week when she spoke about her own low-grade depression and feelings. So this is rampant right now in parents and teachers and students, et cetera. And this is an opportunity for us to see that we can erase the stigma and normalize that mental health is just as important as physical health and is equally as important. So, you know, one of the things that some of the schools are doing are creating a school-based mental health curriculum that starts in pre-K and goes on up to make it so it's okay to talk about feelings. So it's okay to notice how someone else is feeling, to talk about it. And if there's a problem where someone's suffering, to do something about it. Our notice, talk, act approach is really appropriate for that. So the curriculum would normalize mental illness. So other things that we can do in the schools, and many of the school districts I work in East Harlem and in New York City are doing, are, you know, connecting with community mental health clinics and resources. So if they're the school counselors, you know, we have school counselors and therapists in the school, and I actually work in the schools, but many don't. Many schools don't have that. They just have a school counselor. So reaching out to your community mental health, since everything is being done virtually and kids and adolescents and even families really enjoy virtual telepsychiatry and telemental health visits, this is a great opportunity to get people connected. And we've actually had, you know, a huge influx of new children and adolescents and parents, families, and teachers who are interested in therapy now. So this is a great opportunity, and these are some of the ways we can achieve that.
And Dr. Shapiro, I'm wondering, just a follow-up on the social emotional learning curriculum that you touched on. Someone actually brought up a question around the mitigated, if there's barriers to wearing masks or face shields to social emotional learning, because you can't see the person's face and it's just eyes and eyebrows, and what that might impact, or if there's anything to consider there.
Well, that is definitely something that we need to consider. That's why sometimes the virtual learning or the blended might be a way for parents, for teachers, parents, and students to sort of see how people are really feeling, because the camera allows you to not wear a mask. I think it will impact some of our ability to develop empathy for what someone else is feeling, to read the emotions of another person. And I think we're going to have to work on that. I know that there are masks being developed actually that are clear, that are fairly protective, and that might be one option. But I mean, I think we're going to have to look at how that works, and try to teach kids to use their words more to express their feelings when they're in the classroom.
And I get another follow-up, because I think this is really relevant to what we're talking about right here, is what are other ways I can comfort students while still social distancing in my classroom, especially those students who have experienced extreme trauma and thrived off of hugs or other different types of contact last year?
Well, transitional objects. Maybe we could have each child bring something that they feel close to, especially in the little ones, like a stuffed animal. Of course, they might be, we worry about contamination or germs on animals, but if they're keeping it to themselves, and but some sort of transitional object that they could hug when they're feeling bad. You could also have them, have a place in the classroom or an object in each desk that people can touch when they're feeling like they need a hug. Like, we could just make it a transitional object. It's an idea.
Awesome. Thank you for that suggestion. Um, we are seeing a rise of stress and mental health related issues. Given this, we think it's important to have basic knowledge on how you can notice early warning signs, talk about what you have noticed, and take action if you are concerned. The impact of the pandemic can be shown in a multitude of ways. In our mental health early identification program, we talk about noticing disruptive and withdrawn behaviors as the first signs of mental health and other distress. Dr. Colon Rivera, you were a part of that work group, and I was hoping that you could share some things for school staff or family members to notice around those disruptive and withdrawn behaviors.
Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
I cannot start the video. Can you put me back on the video?
Yep.
There you go. We started this program back in 2006 under a different name and typical trouble. Now we call it Notice, Talk, and Act. I mean, it's a brand new program, interactive. And of course, the first stage is noticing, observing, and looking. And of course, we're talking about kids, adolescents. There's a lot of changes on those stages of life, a lot of changes during that lifestyle and brain, physical, hormones, puberty. We're going through all that. So we're looking for changes in behaviors. Yes, kids can feel sick, can cry, can feel sad, but it's the extreme what we're looking for. If they change a behavior, like my kid used to wake up at this time, and I was waking up later, or it was okay for him to wake up late in the day of school, but now he's refusing to go to school. So that's a big change. If we see a change on the sleep patterns, which right with COVID, the structure have changed at home. But if the change is so extreme that he's not going to school, he's not spending more time with the family, he's not even taking care of the pets that we used to take care, he's kind of playing more video games than before. So all those behavior changes, the way they talk, the way he presents himself, the way he's dressing, he's not taking showers anymore. So we're looking for those changes. And parents, family, grandma, brother, sister, anyone can notice a change on that person, on that kid, on that student. And when we talk about notice, talk, and act, Chris, we're talking not only about teachers, right? We're talking about all staff in school, the school drivers, the people that clean, the people that work in the kitchen, IT, social workers. Everyone can notice and and observe the student. They know the student really, really well. And parents, you're spending every day now with your kids. So if you're not noticing a change in behavior, you're never going to notice it right now.
Yeah, and I think that's what we want to emphasize, really, and we have some free resources online that we encourage you to check out around Notice, Talk, Act, either at school or at home during COVID and beyond. And it really is you as either a staff member really understand your student really well, so you can notice those changes when they move away from their typical or normal behavior, and that could be disruptive, that could be withdrawn. And when you do notice that, we want you to start a conversation. And I'm wondering, if there's just some tips that you could share around starting a conversation with a youth or anyone that you have a concern around their mental health.
Yeah, we talk about a few of them. I think Dr. Shapiro mentioned a really good one, which is emotions are okay. I mean, we need to start talking about emotion of something that is human, right? It's okay to feel angry. We kind of, as a parent, I mean, I'm not a parent, but as a parent, you kind of, when someone feels sad, you're afraid that why my kid is sad. It's okay to feel sad sometimes. It's okay to feel angry. So normalizing emotions is really important to start a talk. And I feel it should happen. I mean, you know your kids better, but I mean, transitional object is great. Going outside to a place that they like, or watching a movie and then talking about the situation. You can talk about what you're observing. Oh, I observed that you're not hanging around with this friend, and now you're hanging out with this friend, or you're not talking to your sister the way you used to talk to her, or you're waking up. I notice you're waking up now at 9:30 instead of at 9. So those observations, really easy, really open-ended question. I mean, just present that to your kid.
Thank you so much, Dr. Colon
Yeah,
Rivera.
yeah.
Really appreciate that. Actually, we got a question in that goes back to something Dr. Dubé had mentioned earlier, and I'd like to invite him onto the screen here. For American Indian students in rural communities prior to COVID-19, cyberbullying was a significant issue contributing to depression and suicidality. Now that we are moving to almost an exclusively online platform for the beginning of the school year, do you have any advice on monitoring or preventing cyberbullying?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So, I mean, I think that is a great question, and it's a very important point that cyberbullying has been increasingly a problem anyway. Even before the pandemic, and with the pandemic, it just requires us to be even more vigilant. So one of the things that we're talking about with parents anyway is to be monitoring social media, especially depending on the age of the young person. So you're having routine monitoring, making this a routine part of your process, and finding out from them, even if they're getting older and they're more independent and you're allowing them more privacy, but also finding out from them sort of what are your interactions, what is the normal, and it's not necessarily in a authoritative or kind of authoritarian way, but an inquisitive way. Help me understand social media and help me understand what kinds of interactions do you have. What are some of the positive things that have come out for you? What are some of the negative things that have come out for you? Now, if there is bullying, as Dr. Colon Rivera and as some of the others have pointed out already, that you're going to be looking for signs of, is there increased social isolation? Is this young person, do they seem more sad? Are they not taking care of their activities of daily living? So those are some of the things that you're going to be looking out for. And it, just as with any bullying, are they avoiding certain things? Are they avoiding socializing, even if it's an online social platform? Are they avoiding school because of this? So it'll be questions that you'd be asking both as a teacher, if you have the ability to talk to them privately in a setting, or as a parent to find out what's going on. But I think it's an excellent point, and I think cyberbullying is almost as big a problem, if not a bigger problem, than actual bullying.
Thank you, Dr. Dubé. Dr. Shapiro, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I did. Let me start my video again. Yes. So cyberbullying and bullying in general is very, very painful for students. And I know that most schools do have a policy about it. However, I want to just let everyone know about a wonderful app called No Bullying by SAMHSA. it gives all these key points to parents, to educators, and to kids, and gives vignettes and ways that parents, educators, and kids can stop bullying. So it's KNOW, or, like sort of a stop sign, bullying, and it's free to download, and it's just fantastic. And it also addresses LGBTQ bullying, and there are lots of resources on both APA and ACAP online for bullying and cyberbullying.
Thank you, Dr. Shapiro. We did get a message or a question, excuse me, emailed into us, and I want to invite Dr. Kraus on to take this. Got a question about, I come from a divorced family. I have one viewpoint that I think should happen as far as, our son or daughter goes to going back to school. My partner has another. How do you have an informed family discussion around these issues?
What I always tell families that are either in the process of a divorce or are divorced, before they either talk to the child or talk to the school about an issue at hand, that they come to an agreement. The majority of times there are disagreements with divorced parents. It's because of the conflicts between each of them, and it's not because of the best interest of the child. And they need to sit back, especially with something as important as this, and to make a decision. They need to, if the child is working with a psychiatrist, a mental health provider, pediatrician, talk with them about it if there's a medical concern about it. Don't come up with your own opinions, especially if they're different. It's one thing if you have unified opinion as a family, but if you're split like that, and that includes happily married parents as well, talk to the professionals about them. Use them to at least help guide you into the decision process. If you still can't come to an agreement, you need to get somebody in place. You need to get some type of mediator to help you out. And they exist all over the place to be able to come together so you can have a unified decision, because eventually something is going to happen, right? It's going to be one way or the other. So it would make a lot more sense, and it'll be a lot more helpful and less traumatic to the child to be able to work that out before presenting it to the child.
Thank you, Dr. Kraus. Really, really appreciate that. That question came in from one of our attendees around, how do you work with a student who lost a family member of his during this pandemic due to COVID-19? Are there any tips or recommendations that you can provide around having that conversation, or how you can best support that student as we're still currently living in a pandemic? Dr. Shapiro, do you want to take it?
Sure. So I think it's really important as we start school, whether virtual or blended, to have the teachers bring this subject up to the kids. Gee, how did this COVID experience, affect you? Did you lose anyone that you love or know? And let the kids express and share with the peer group what happened and their feelings, and be able to sort of like normalize it in some way. I think that some of the kids will need to have individual, therapy. We may even want to have groups or grief groups for different age groups in the schools, or as an after-school activity to talk about how is COVID affecting you. I think parents and educators also may need that, and I think that should be given a consideration by schools and mental health professionals working with kids. But I think that trauma-informed treatment may be necessary for some of the kids who are really suffering, who lost a primary caretaker or lost a grandmother or grandfather that lived with them. I mean, I have many families I work with that lost several people. And so that's my answer, trauma-informed and focused treatment. But first, let's open the door to talking about it. Because many of the kids really have suffered and been traumatized.
Dr. Kraus, you want to jump back in?
Yeah, I just want to add a couple thoughts. I think the construct of this being a trauma-focused issue is really important, not just for those kids that have lost a loved one or even know somebody that's lost one, but many of the children are truly fearful of what's going on, and that they could infect somebody or on that level. And you have to really respect the level of anxiety and potential trauma focus that may be going on with the kids. For parents to offer a stage to their child, just in regards to how they're feeling in the process going back to school, really, really important to make them feel comfortable to talk about those feelings, so then they can sort of have some information in regards to whether or not further interventions might be helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Kraus. We did have another question come through the attendees around engaging kids, especially virtually using Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom. I'm wondering if any of the panelists have any recommendations for commonly used either platforms that work with Zoom or Microsoft Teams, or fun ways that you can engage students in the classroom during this virtual time. Any of the panelists can jump in here. I know, some things that we've encouraged schools to do definitely during the pandemic is to actually set in a weekly, like a check-in on a Monday, a check-in on a Wednesday, a check-in on a Friday, and do highs and lows, allow for some of that group interaction and engagement. But I'll pass it over to Dr. Shapiro and then Dr. Harding.
So I really believe in the benefit of movement. And so in most of the elementary schools and even middle schools, I've seen a lot of bonding and connection between the kids when they do sort of like physical activity during the Zoom sessions, or groups that they're using for their platform in their schools. So dance, different physical activities and stretching exercises. I've seen yoga used for the kids. And so it's just been really amazing. Meditation. And so I think that's been sort of a bonding and grounding experience. I also have seen some teachers use something that the Quaker educators sometimes use, is like sort of a couple of moments of just silence as a group. And then if someone wants to speak, they raise their hand and they speak. And so those are things that I think have decreased the tension and also opened up avenues for the kids to feel more connected. In terms, I wanted to just someone else had a question about how to engage kids one-on-one in like therapy sessions or individual counseling. And, there are games that have worked for me. I mean, anything from, hangman, tic-tac-toe, you can do it on 2 screens. Other games, I've engaged kids that while they're building with Legos. I mean, it's much more challenging with the preschool set, but there are lots of things we can do. And actually we have resources on, telepsychiatry, mental health on the APA website. Also ACAP has some on how to engage kids in these virtual sessions.
Yeah, so to answer that question specifically, Google Classroom, I've become really familiar with it. They have quite a few integrative programs. Flipgrid is one. It's an amazing little program that the kids use to send in videos of themselves, and it's all posted on one platform. I found that very helpful, in particular for my kids, to be able to post a message and they sort of send messages back and forth. Physical education was done virtually. The kids took the Zoom outside, made an obstacle course, and the teacher was there directing it. There are Google Classroom, if you play around with it. I don't know the other 2 platforms very well, but I just wanted to specifically comment that you can do those interactive ones with Google Classroom.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harding. I really do appreciate that. We are kind of coming to the close on our time here. We're about 5 minutes to 9 o'clock here on the East Coast. And, we did want to share a little bit of our contact information with you. Like I said, our plan is to take these questions that we got tonight. And if we didn't make it to your question, I do apologize. Our hope is to take that and provide with a FAQ document after this. But I'd like to share with you our contact information here. You can find us on the web at apafdn.org. You can also find the foundation on Twitter at @PsychFoundation, Facebook at APAFDN, and then to email us, our general email is apafoundation@psych.org. We're going to launch a final poll here just to gauge how you felt this town hall went. We would love to do more opportunities to engage the larger school community like this. So if this went well, if there's other topics that you'd like to be seen, please feel free to email us. And just in closing, thank you so much to our panel of experts, Dr. Shapiro, Dr. Kraus, Dr. Dubé, Dr. Colon Rivera, and Dr. Harding for your thoughtful answers and for spending time with us today. You know, we just want you to invite you to visit apafdn.org/schools to learn more about what the APA Foundation has to offer your school community. Thank you all for the great engagement. We got great questions from the attendees, so much that we weren't even able to get to all of them. And just thank you so much for joining us tonight for the virtual town hall, Mentally Healthy Schools in Times of a Pandemic. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe. Have a good night.
Thank you.